Alex DiFrancesco is a writer of fiction, creative nonfiction, journalism, and very recently poetry. They have been published in Tin House, The Washington Post, Pacific Standard, Brevity, and more. These are literary journals. Their essay collection, Psychopomps, and their novel, All City, were most recently published. Publishers Weekly has called them an immediate and compassionate voice, and their storytelling has been featured at the Fringe Festival, Life of the Law, the Queen's Book Festival, and the Heart podcast. All City begins with a massive hurricane. And what it's looking at and exploring are our differences in class, those who could avoid it and those who get hit by it, and other larger social issues of race and gender and identity, and how our biases can affect our behavior, but also how we can rise above them and create a new community. How hard that is to do, but how it's really the only possible way forward. So I'm going to let Alex tell you more about the book, but I am super duper thrilled. And as we were talking about, I think this needs to be the next Hulu miniseries, because when you hear from it, you're going to understand why. So Alex, thank you.
Thanks so much to everyone for being here. Thank you to Janice and Suzanne for putting this all together, and thank you to the college for having me. It's really quite an honor to be here. I am a former community college student myself, so it feels really wonderful to be here with all you incredibly wonderful, talented, intelligent people who are progressing towards your dreams, whatever they are, in the educational capacity. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. How are we feeling tonight? Good? Excellent. Yeah, started off like a rock concert, right? So I wrote this book. It's called All City. And this book has 3 different narrators. And it, as Suzanne said, it explores gender, class, race, lots of really important and heavy topics. And so I want to read you a bit from each of the narrators. And the first narrator, and maybe I'll read you short sections after that as well. But the first narrator, her name is Michaela. And Michaela has lived in New York City since she was very young. She grew up there. And gentrification is slowly forcing her out. The economic divide that she is on the wrong side of is slowly forcing her to move further and further out in the city. It has forced her grandmother into public housing. And when the storm hits, she doesn't really have anywhere to go. There's no way for her to escape the city. There's no place for her to go if she did escape the city. She is waiting on a paycheck from her job at the 24/7, which is the basically the 7-Eleven, which has overtaken New York City in this near future. So this first section is Michaela at the very beginning. This is the very first section of the book. A week before Superstorm Bernice, I was walking home from the 24/7 when I saw it. It was in the spot where the old bodega had been for 10 years, years in which I'd gotten to know the owner, Abdul, and in which he'd always let me know when the Aussies had come in. Oh, by the way, there's invented slang in every one of these sections. Aussies are out-of-state cigarettes, but I'm going to make you do context clue work for the rest of them. He always let me know when the Aussies had come in. Abdul had told me a while back he'd be closing up, that he couldn't afford the rent anymore. Not now, not since the neighborhood had gotten a new name from the chum slingers who had made it sound more like an extension of the nearby, more fashionable neighborhood. It was sink more smash in to make it the kind of place that the new neighborhood residents wanted, or pack up and leave. And he had decided to pack up. The it I saw that night was another store. But when you slagged all day for smash enough to barely pay your rent and not do much else, there's the little bodegas like Abdul ran, where you can maybe go and get little bits of something, a cup of noodles or a $1 bag of chips. And then there's places that make you feel like you're too poor to walk inside. And feeling very poor, being very poor, is like going down a street and realizing that all the beautiful places you walk by, places that have wine and good food and music, are locked when you try to walk through their doors. And so after a while, you stop looking at them and start looking down at your feet, hoping maybe to find $100 bill that will act as a key to one of those doors, or a drug or a dream that will make you forget those doors are there at all. The store I saw that night was not open to me. I could tell you that. I could tell looking in, seeing the dim lights, seeing the woman who looked like she'd just come off some decorating magazine cover, looking dap even in her slag clothes, that it was not a bodega. I saw a little sign inside. I saw it next to a little bowl of dog treats that the sign told me were made of traveled ingredients from the finest places in the world. The cost of getting them there be damned. And my head started feeling squeezed together, like my brain was expanding and taking up too much space. In all the years I'd lived in this neighborhood, in all the times my family had helped organize block parties, in all the times my dad had volunteered to talk to kids in school about street violence as someone who barely got out of it alive himself, in all the times my mother cooked food for the old lady who lived down the hall and struggled to get by on her piddly shit Cienti disability check, and whose kids never came to see her, no one ever offered us a damn thing that could be called traveled. I reached into my bag then, and from all the things that slipped through my fingers, my keys, my wallet, my sunglasses, I grabbed one thing, a combination lock that I kept on my locker in the break room of the 24/7 and took home with me at night. The metal weighed heavy in my hand there inside my bag, but only for a moment before I whipped it up and back behind me, then over my shoulder and through the dimly lit window. The glass broke and fell like bells. I heard the woman in her slag clothes scream, and I ran. So that's Michaela. So the next character we have here is from a bit of a different economic position. Her name is Yvonne. Yvonne is a art collector, and not just any art. Like Yvonne owns Basquiat paintings, which she got for graduation gifts. Those are very expensive paintings. Those are not cheap. Um, and Yvonne is the villain of the book, but she is I did everything I could to make her not a one-dimensional villain. So this is a section from the very beginning, and Yvonne is packing up her apartment, and she gets very bored with it and decides to hire someone to do it. And she decides that instead of packing up her apartment to leave before this storm, she's going to go to Greenwood Cemetery and see Jean-Michel Basquiat's grave. And Pollock is her dog, a very cute little teddy bear of a cabochon. Um, so Pollock and I had a bit of free time before we had to leave the city, and I tried to think to myself what I'd like to do with that little bit of time. I would walk Pollock, of course, but also I'm not so far from Brooklyn, and the car services hadn't closed down yet in preparation for the storm. So I figured we would take one out to Brooklyn to see Basquiat. Pollock would take a walk in Greenwood. The first time I went to see Basquiat was kind of a disaster. It was before I had Pollock, so I was all alone. Basquiat's buried out in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, which, if you don't know, is the biggest, oldest, richest cemetery in the city. I mean, there are huge monuments all over the place. Mausoleums bigger and nicer than some people's apartments. Bow flowering trees in the springtime. The whole place is like a magnifique park, but with dead people. It's where I'd like to be buried someday and have people walking around enjoying themselves, having picnics near me. I thought it would be nice walking around Greenwood looking for his grave, but even with a map, I got terribly lost. My wrist screen decided to update, so I didn't have it to guide me for about 25 minutes. By that time, I had walked in a huge circle and was back at the front gate, this huge castle like brown brick structure. I gave up really sad because I love Basquiat and everything about him, and I had just wanted to see him, and I'd failed. But it was almost like that failure was meant to be. I went back a few weeks later. This time I was less stressed out about finding his grave and thought, even if I don't, I'll just walk around thinking about him. And that's what I did. I thought about how cold and alone he must have felt sleeping in Tompkins Square Park when he was a teenager, but also how it must have been okay, because even then he must have known how great he was, and that it was just a matter of time until everyone else saw it too. I thought of him alone at night in a hospital bed, looking at the copy of Gray's Anatomy his mother had given him after he was in that terrible car accident. Then I began to think of his mother, how she had gone crazy, been institutionalized when he was just a kid. It made me think of my own mom, who had died when I was very young. I knew him in that moment, I swear. Even though there are all these obvious differences between us, I knew what the pain of losing a mom was. I stopped and looked around me. I was under a bough of a cherry tree on a path lined with them. I swear, right then, I knew Basquiat. I looked down at the map I was carrying and realized I had been walking on the right path, not as some silly metaphor or anything, but really, truly walking the right way to find him. I would be there soon. Finding his grave was hard in a lot of ways. I thought that it would be one of the huge Febleau ones, one of the obelisks that reached to the sky or a stern angel. But no. I searched and searched the general vicinity on the map before it suddenly dawned on me. The row of low, square, plain graves that looked like pauper graves. That's what marked this man who had so obviously loomed above all the other people buried here. I started to cry a little. As I walked down the row of inconsequential graves, I spotted one that appeared to be covered in garbage. The sobbing came full on when I realized it was his. For a minute, the tears blurred my vision as I thought, this is it. You live your life in the hugest way. You make the most magnifique art, and this is the way it ends, under a pauper's grave somewhere covered in trash. But then my eyes cleared. I saw the little items on the grave had all been placed there so lovingly. A cigarette, a paintbrush, a piece of malachite, a paper with a crude crown drawn on it that said Samo underneath. I wondered about all of the people who had come looking as I had come looking, who had left all these little garbage treasures of theirs as an offering after walking the path to the grave, and maybe even understanding him as I did. The tears started again. I almost started crying then on my way there in the car with Pollock as the storm was about to descend on New York, thinking about it. But I pulled myself together. I patted Pollock's soft fur. My therapist often says that I should pick him up when I'm sad because touch is a wonderful antidepressant. I patted him and looked at his soft brown eyes, and I started talking to the driver. Where will you go? I said. Excuse me, he said, turning down the radio. I'm sorry to pry, I said, but I talk to everybody, just about everybody. Where will you go when this storm hits? I don't live here in the city, the driver said. I peered at the license in a plastic sheath on the rear of his seat. His name was Hameen. His English was slightly broken, but my wrist screen was translating what he said onto the screen, so I'd have no difficulty understanding. So I will go home, he said. Where do you live? I asked. Out in New Jersey, about an hour away. I drive to the city every day, then drive people around all day, then I drive back. Then I drive my children to their sports, then I drive my wife to her work. It seems like I live behind a car wheel sometimes. You'll be safe there? I asked. Pollock was making low noises of happiness as I scratched behind his ears. The storm shouldn't hit us too hard. Things are safer out there in many ways. When I was younger, people were afraid. There were so many reasons. They sometimes wouldn't get in my car. They called me names. They did not like my name or where I was from. But things have changed a bit for us. My children are safer now than I was. Things do get better, I said, sitting back. And it was nice that this man believed this too, after what he'd been through. The water wars have given us so many immigrants that it's hard to believe that even when he was younger, things were that bad. I mean, people should be used to people coming over. I thought for a second, maybe I should start a nonprofit for these issues. And then I thought of what he said, that his children were safe out in New Jersey, playing sports and having fun even. Things always get better. They have to. Pollock yipped once, as if in agreement. That's Yvonne. If you don't like her, you're not alone. And then I'm going to read a section from Jesse, who is the other point of view character. Jesse is an anarchist, genderqueer street punk who lives in an abandoned IRT station, which is an elevated train station in the Bronx. Jesse lived in this station with their best friend slash partner Lux, who's a trans woman, and Lux was injured in a hate crime before the novel started. And Jessie also lives there with Jose and Sebastian, who are her two friends, um, who are their two friends. Sorry, I was talking about Lux. Uh, and yeah, so they all live in this abandoned train station together, and things are pretty rough for them. But they're very like hard scrabble, and they get by. And they do well enough for their living circumstances. I'm trying to think of anything else you might need to know for this. Oh yeah, Jesse has a lot of profanity that they use in their as their slang. So get ready for lots of profanity and inventive profanity. It had been a few weeks since the storm, less than that since the night Lux disappeared. We'd been ready for the storm. The moment we heard it was coming, we raided the richest neighborhoods only, dumpstering outside the best grocery stores until we had enough food to last us for months. Good food, too. Cans that were maybe a little dented, boxes that were just a little raggedy ass, but good stuff. We got a stack of 5-gallon bottles of water. We took the money that Lux had made dumpstering and reselling the barely used electronics that people in this town are always tossing out and bought her enough hormones to get through a while and the rest of us enough Old English 40s to last a week. Or a couple of days. Or maybe 2 really wild nights. In any case, we were toasting with the booze and congratulating ourselves when the storm came. It was more Novocaine than hurricane. A lot of water blew in the open end of the station and pooled in the gully where the tracks used to be, but we were far back and stayed mostly dry. There was no power in the station, so we couldn't freak ourselves out watching the news or anything. Lux kept bugging out because she was worried that her pile of mix players and wrist screens were going to get ruined, which was later kind of funny, but not in a laughing kind of way, because they stayed dry and the whole city got ruined. But we hung out and drank malt liquor, and I tried to play guitar and sing this really old song by this guy who's been dead forever, Woody Guthrie. I learned it from some traveler kid when I was moving around more. But I kept fucking it up because I was drunk, and Jose yelled at me the third time I tried to sing it, said I had a shit voice and I couldn't play guitar. So Lux glared at him and picked up the guitar and said, I dare you, you piece of shit, to make fun of my voice. And then she sang and I sang along. Her voice sounded fucking great. I knew her when it was different. She'd worked a lot to change it, to make it more what she wanted it to be. We sang together and laughed, and Jose and Sebastian laughed too. We weren't really mad at Jose anyway. Sitting in the station, I remembered her voice singing, breathy and soft and beautiful. My brothers and my sisters are stranded on this road, a hot and dusty road that a million feet have trod. Rich man took my home and drove me from my door, and I ain't got no home in this world anymore. I missed her voice singing and laughing and echoing through the station. Lux. Fuck. Where were those Xanax? Um, yeah. How do we feel about one more short section? All right. All right. Um, and I'm just going to take a little poll. How do we feel? So I've got a section that's narrated by Jesse that's about art, which is also very important in this book. It becomes very important. And I've got a section narrated by Michaela that is about community. How many people want more Jesse? How many people want more Michaela? All right, it looks like Michaela is the winner. Um, so after a while, this is a short section, and this is going to be just the last thing I read. But after a while, Michaela and some of the other folks who survived the storm squat an abandoned condo, a luxury condo, and they build a utopian community in it. And there is one woman who they met at a emergency shelter, and her name is Drusilla, and she has 2 children, and Drusilla feels that because she has 2 children that she deserves more than everyone else, and the community is run in such a way that everyone is equal and everyone gets the same as everyone else. Kind of, I don't know, does anybody know the Zapatistas from Mexico? Their slogan is everything for everyone and nothing for ourselves. That's kind of the deal with the utopian condo. Um, so anyway, in this section, Michaela, who has been fighting with Drusilla, has a moment with her. We kept going out on expeditions to get food and water. More people joined us than that first day. Each night we would come back to the lobby and spread everything we'd found out on the floor. We divided it up and passed it out to all the people who lived in the building. Drusilla came down every night with her 2 children. It was the only time she came downstairs. She wouldn't let them play with the other children or leave her side. When they tried, she grabbed them back by their arms or sleeves. She didn't look as ashamed as she took the food and water. She looked like it was owed to her. Somehow, though, I got the feeling that she didn't exactly think it was owed to her as much as to them. She would grab a gallon of water and tip it up for first one, then the other child to drink from. Only after they had drank all they wanted would she drink any at all. One night, after we had distributed food, I was making my way up the dark stairs with a flashlight I had found in my apartment. I was walking quietly down the hall when I decided to keep going, to go to her door. I knocked once. At first, there was no answer, so I knocked again. I waited and waited until finally the door opened. It was pretty dark inside, except for some candles. Drusilla was on the other side of the door with a child on each side of her. "What do you want?" she said. Before I could answer, she lowered the dark lids of her eyes a bit more and added, "We're here and we've got every right to what everybody else has. So if that's what you've come to talk about, you can just leave." "I know," I said. I paused. "Can I come in?" "You stay away from here," she said. She blocked the doorway with her body. She reached down and pushed her children behind her. "I'm not going to try to take anything from you," I said. I suddenly didn't know why I was there at all. "We're going to have to slag together, you know? I don't care what you or anybody else does," she said. "All I care about is taking care of them." "We all care about your children, but if you're going to stay here, you're going to have to start caring about everybody else." "Don't you tell me," she said. She was pointing at me now emphatically. "Don't you dare tell me how to take care of my family. You don't know. How could you know?" I sighed and looked down. I didn't know what she had been through. I had a bag of chocolate in my hand that we'd scrounged up at one of the empty stores. I had been saving it for Ale, for when he got back from playing in the lobby with the other kids. Some of them spoke Spanish, and he'd been chattering away with them. It made me so happy to see him coming to life after the state we'd found him in. Her kids had been mostly locked away in the apartment she'd claimed. I knelt down and smiled at one of the kids who was peeking around his mom's legs. "Here," I said, handing him the chocolate. "This is for you." The kid looked so damn happy. He ran off with the other kid, and I could see them tear the bag open in the dimness of the room. When I looked back up, Drusilla had tears in her eyes. "Why are you people being so good to us?" she almost whispered. I shrugged. "We're all in this together," I said. I could smell the sweat on both of us, the unwashed hair and bodies and clothes, cleaned as best we could with what water we had, what sanitary wipes. I leaned in and hugged her tight. At first she resisted, but then she loosened up like a rag doll in my arms and cried. "Thank you,"